redemption, the redemptive nature that he has, him providing for those who are faithful as well. And this is maybe a shining light that we kind of saw sometimes in Judges, but not very often. And that's pretty much kind of the idea here of the book of Ruth, is the story of redemption and God's faithfulness. And I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. Regular Baptist Press here, the people we do the Sunday school book through, it wants me to go through the whole book in 1 week. Okay, I think it's an awful lot to do. It has the 4 chapters broken down into 3 sections, and that's probably that's my plan on how to try to go through this, is do maybe a section a week, maybe a section every 2 weeks, or a chapter every 2 weeks, and kind of see. We'll just kind of begin to go and see where we get. I promise you that we will not be through all 4 chapters today. That would be entirely moving way too fast, I think. Because, of course, we know the story in the book of Ruth very well, and this is a good one. Just a funny thing that I thought of this week. I was actually give my wife some credit for making a funny joke. I'm usually the funny one in the house. But we've got a new kitten that we have found laying on the side of the road, essentially. Found 2 of them. And Pippa couldn't say no, right? So we were trying to find somebody else to give it to. Pippa didn't like the idea of us giving it away, so we have a new kitten in the house. And it's a cute little thing. But anyways, we've got another older cat in the house, and it was late one night. I don't remember what day it was. It might have been Wednesday night. Other cat's eating food, and the little kitten's like just kind of underneath it, right? Just kind of like grabbing the scraps of what's left of the older cat as it's falling out. And Haley said, we should have named this kitten Ruth. And it took me a second because it was like, I was like, what? She's like, look, it's like Boaz and Ruth. She's just gleaning. Oh, yeah, that was a good one, honey. That's cute. Funny. So we know the story well, right, of Boaz and Ruth, and the redemptive nature of what goes on here with Ruth and Naomi, and how God kind of begins to hone in essentially the line that Christ is going to come through, as we're going to see through this as well. But we're going to see this continued faithfulness, right? Even in the midst of a faithless nation, we're going to see continued faithfulness. And this book of Ruth, of course, is a love story between Ruth and Boaz, right, at its core, and how God kind of brings them together providentially. But more importantly, the book of Ruth is the story of God's love for humanity. So we're going to see this really cool love story between Ruth and Boaz. And it is, right? It's Hallmark worthy. It's a really good story. And we'll bring out all those gushy feelings as we go through it. But it's also really important for see that the book of Ruth is a depiction of God's love for humanity as well. And how we didn't deserve what God gave us. We still don't deserve what God gave us. We're all well aware of that. We continue over and over again, like the book of Judges, to be like the Israelites and fail him. But yet he still has this endless love for us, that he provides this Redeemer through the most unlikely of circumstances, so that we can know him and that we can be with him for eternity. Right? And it's a great kind of opposite, right, of Judges. Because you see God in Judges loving the people of Israel, but having to do so out of correction, right? He has to take them to the woodshed and wear their hiding out a few times and allow all these bad things to happen. And he's doing that because he loves them, right? And he wants them to do what's right, and he wants them to serve him, and he wants them to be obedient. And they just keep not doing those things, so he has to correct them. When we get to the book of Ruth, right, and we kind of see a different type of God's love. It's the love all the same, but it's just how the most unlikely of circumstances he brings these 2 people together, of some interesting things, and it's something again like you would see out of a movie, and then begins we see that, of course, the Redeemer coming through this union of Ruth and Boaz. Faithfulness in a faithless nation. Now, the worst drought in United States history struck the Great Plains in the mid-1930s, right? The Yearbook of Agriculture for 1934 announced that approximately 35 million acres of formerly cultivated land have essentially been destroyed from crop production. 100 million acres now in crops have lost all or most of its topsoil, and 125 million acres of land now in crop are rapidly losing topsoil, what was known to be the Great Dust Bowl, right? That took place in the 30s. During this Dust Bowl disaster, many farmers, of course, had to abandon their farms and their work. They had to move into industrialized cities and search for work and income into the more urban areas. The book of Ruth, and there's a whole other vein we could take of how we're never really going to see water rise again, because you think about the dust bowls and weather patterns and things like, and we'll get into that later on, probably next couple weeks when we get into Genesis chapter 6 again, but it's a whole other vein there of thought we can go to. We won't get there today. The book of Ruth, though, unfolds the story of a family of four that moves from the promised land during a dust bowl, right, during a great time of famine. And they had to go to an unfamiliar city, Moab, of course, in search for a new life and for a new home and for new work and all these things. Now, however, though, life in Moab, as we will see, brought disasters upon this family of four far worse than any famine could. And the only bright spot during the time in Moab was the conversion of a daughter-in-law, Ruth, who converted from paganism into true worship. And then showed true faithfulness as a daughter-in-law in really desperate circumstances. Let's define this, and I want you all to define it for me before we jump into this. What does it mean to be faithful? What is your definition? How do you explain? How do you maybe live your... Explain to me, or define to me, what it means to be faithful. And like I tell my kids, I'll stand here until you answer.
Dedicated and unwavering.
Dedicated and unwavering. Okay. Do we have anything else?
Honest.
Honest. And any other descriptive words we want to describe faithfulness? Perseverance. Anything else? I look at it like this. Just showing up every day. Right? Simply put, it's just showing up every day and doing what is required and doing what is needed every day. And even on those days where, man, I don't feel like doing this, right? And because we all have those days, is being tough, right? Both physically and emotionally and spiritually, and pushing through the difficult time. It's easy to be faithful when things are going good, right? When you're feeling good and God's been blessing and when things get a little tough, it's a little tough to be. It's just showing up every day, right? And putting in the grind, just doing it every day, making sure that you are taking care of the things that need to be taken care of. Faithfulness in your spiritual life. Making sure you're doing, living faithfully unto God, obediently unto God, make sure you're having your devotion times, make sure you're spending your time in prayer, and we all know the steps of being faithful to God. And then it's the same thing in just our secular portion of our life, like me getting up and having to go to work every day and go through the things every day and not slacking up. That's being faithful, just going through, making sure things are taken care of every day. Who do you look to, as an example of faithfulness in your life? Give me some examples of people that you look to as examples of faithfulness. And you can't say Ruth, unless it's like one of your main characters you like to look at. Who do you look to as faithfulness? Job, good one. Don't just have to be Bible characters, but Job's a good one. Who else do you look to in your life as examples of faithfulness? Moses, another good one. Things got tough sometimes on Moses, but he kept right on keeping on, right? Any other examples of people in your life or examples of faithfulness that you look to? Pastor Rob, sure. Absolutely. Anything else? I would say my father, right? It's an example of faithfulness in my life. For 34 years now, I've watched him show up and do it every day, right? I think he would probably say the same thing about his father. Just show up and be faithful. It's not always easy, not always great. And I got more of that as I had my own kids, right? Because I saw the importance of being faithful to a family and making sure that things are taken care of. And I don't always do the best job. She'll tell you that, right? But I'm going to show up and at least try and see. And then chips will fall where they fall, and where we mess up, we'll correct and go on. That's part of being faithful. That's the way we do things, and that's what faithfulness is. The book of Ruth, of course, also true romantic love story, but involves a Moabite woman and Boaz, a farmer in Bethlehem, Judah. And then the redemption that happens through the next 4 chapters, okay? So let's get into Ruth's life, first of all, in Moab, in the first 5 verses here of chapter 1. Now, the first chapter of the book of Ruth introduces us to the setting, so it's going to kind of set the scene for us. And as we read Ruth, we'll kind of see that Ruth's story around the time of Gideon and the oppressive Midianite raid. All right, so if you remember back to the book of Judges, and I had that timeline up, you kept seeing Ruth kind of down at the bottom of it. This is during the time of Gideon and when the Midianite during their raid. So that kind of puts in context where we're at. All right, verse number 1. Ruth 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Let's go ahead and read down to verse 5. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. All right, so as we see there, verse 1, there's a famine in the land, right? And just because we see the famine and knowing where they're at, just again puts us in this time frame of Gideon and the oppressive Midianite raid. And because of these desperate circumstances that were going on, this motivates Elimelech and his family to take his wife, Naomi, of course, and their 2 sons, and move to Moab, as we see in verse number 2, right? And they come in the end of verse 2. They came into the country of Moab and continued there. So they had to move because things had gotten pretty difficult. Now, even though there was a famine and oppression in Israel, there must have been at least some light compared with these pretty desperate circumstances that Naomi is experiencing in Moab. Okay, there had to have been some light somewhere else, but maybe staying home, right? Because essentially, about the time they move into Moab, we see some tragedies happen through verses 3, 4, and 5, right? And first of all, Naomi's husband dies, leaving her to be now a widow in a foreign land, which would have been scary enough. Her sons then break one of Israel's covenants, and they go and marry whom? pagan women, right? They are marrying Moabites, and as Israelites, they were told specifically not to do that, right? Not to marry any woman that was not of the tribe of Judah, right? Not a righteous woman. But we see the sons marrying pagan women. Now, if we think back into the book of Judges, this happened quite a bit, and every time this happened, what was usually the result? Nothing good, right? This was the way in which the idol worship, which the little g god worship, got infiltrated into the Israelites, because they were marrying into these cultures, marrying into these societies, and then they were adopting the practices, the pagan practices, and then bringing that back into the Israelites, and that was how God had it over and over and over again through Judges. That was kind of the way things began to go south. Okay? So, in a matter of 2 verses, we've got Naomi, husband has passed away, her 2 sons have now married pagan women, and if you get to verse 5, or the end of verse 4, and they dwelled there about 10 years, right? So at the end of their 10th anniversaries, essentially, we see that not only had Elimelech now passed away, but within the 10 years, at the end of 10 years, we see both of her sons as well pass away, and she now has 2 widowed pagan daughter-in-laws, and that's the only family that she could call family, right? So Naomi's in a pretty tough spot here. This is circumstances that have gotten really bad, not really quick, taking a decade, but things have gotten pretty bad. Go ahead, Chad. I think there should be... Yeah, leave it right here for just a second. Here's the period of judgment. I know this is kind of hard to see for you all because it's really small, but this is the same thing we have been looking at now for a couple of months, a month or so, a couple of months. This is the area, this highlighted area right here in the box over there is kind of where we are at. As you can see, Bethlehem, the Dead Sea is in the middle of this, so here's Bethlehem. Here is the Dead Sea, and then down in here is Moab. All right, so this is kind of the area geographically that we were talking about. Go ahead, Jed. Should be another one, I think. All right, here's Naomi heading down to Moab, across the Dead Sea to avoid the famine. Okay. Now leave it right there. So this is kind of that's the geographical places that we are at. Now, if you will, go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 23. And we will leave Naomi and her daughter-in-laws right there for just a second. Deuteronomy chapter 23. And look at verses 3 and 4. Deuteronomy 23 verses 3 and 4. An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation, of the Lord forever, because they met you not with bread and water in the way which ye came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse thee. Go to Judges. Leave that in your brain for a second. Go to Judges chapter 3 and look at verse 12. Judges 3, 12 down to verse 14. This was about Ehud, if you remember. That's from many, many moons ago now. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered unto him the children of Ammon and Amalek, and went and smote Israel, and possessed the city of palm trees. So the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. How would you describe Moab's relationship with God? Not great, right? Moabite people, the Moabites, the nation of Moab does not have a great relationship here with God. Deuteronomy is pretty damning, really, towards the nation of Moab. How they're never going to be able to come in. 10 generations doesn't matter. So we can kind of see where they're at. Back now to Ruth. So Naomi now has Moabite daughter-in-laws, and we know how God essentially feels about the Moabites, and that's the only people that she can call family. So she's in a foreign land, doesn't know anybody, has these Moabite daughter-in-laws, and her husband and sons have passed away. And now we get to verse number 6, in which we see some, first of all, really desperate circumstances. This then brings us to some decisive choices that have to be made as well. Verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So Naomi hears that what is over in Israel? The famine, right? She hears that the famine has ended back home. And she decides, as we see here in verse number 7, or verse number 6, that she is going to leave Moab. There's nothing really holding her here except her daughter-in-laws. And she's going back to Israel because the famine is over. Verse number 7. When she decides to return home, of course, as we'll see, she advises her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, to go back to their mothers, right? Verse number 7. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord dealt kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead, and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Okay, so we see Naomi's telling the daughters-in-law, who obviously have been there with her, living with her for at least 10 years, that she's going back, and that they need to go back to their mom and dad's house, go back to their own tribes, their own people, or whatever. The daughter-in-laws have been kind to Naomi. They have served her well in the death of these family members. She's obviously not trying to just kick them out, because there's obviously a good relationship here between Naomi and her daughter-in-laws, but she wants them to go back to their mom's house so they can be taken care of, because Naomi doesn't see her as being able to take care of these 2 daughters-in-law. All right, so she is trying to tell them to go back home. Verse number 10. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb that may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? And would ye stay for them for having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So we now begin to see the characters of this stories, like their personalities, and kind of see the direction this is going. Ruth tells the daughter-in-laws to go back home. They obviously have a great affection for Ruth. Naomi have a great affection for Naomi, and want to see that she is taken care of, because of course she is getting older in age. And she goes through a whole diatribe here about how there's no sense in their staying with him, staying with her. She's too old, one, to have a husband. If she was to have a husband, she's too old to really have children. And even if she was going to have children, the daughters-in-law are not going to wait around for them old enough to be grown enough to be men to be wed. So there's plenty of reasons, and what I would call like legitimate, understandable reasons, that Naomi is trying to tell her daughter-in-laws to go find other people, right? Go find another husband, go back home, whatever it is. I'm just an old woman. Can't help you anymore. You're going to be better off. So Naomi is not trying to kick her daughter-in-laws to the curb. She is actually showing what I consider quite a bit of love and affection for them by explaining to them that they don't need to try to take care of her, that she will be able to do so herself. There's no need for them to waste essentially some of their good years of trying to take care of her. They need to go back. So she's doing this out of love. Okay, I fully think. And she goes through this whole thing about not being able to bear children and not waiting around. And we finally see at the end of verse number 14 that when she goes through this explanation and she's done, that there is a division that takes place. Right? Orpah, the one daughter-in-law, kisses her mother-in-law, and as we kisses her to leave, right? That essentially we don't see that in Scripture, but that's what's implied here, and her giving her the kiss of goodbye makes sense why that is the case, right? But we see the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, not giving her mother-in-law the kiss, right? At the end of verse 14, we actually see her. It says, Scripture says, but Ruth clave unto her. And if you read that, when you as if you just clave unto her means what? What is that a description of? I take it, and I was looking at some of the actual. She grabbed a hold of her like and wasn't telling. I'm not leaving. I'm not like where you go, I go. Grabbed the hold of her and said, it's fine. I understand what you're saying, but I ain't leaving you. Wherever you go, I'm going with you. Claving on to, grabbing a hold of her, letting her know that, hey, I'm with you. Okay? Compare the situation now in Israel with what was going on in Moab. Which of these two places is a better place to live? Just with what's happening right now. In Israel and in Moab, which is the better place to live? Just to be able to exist. Moab right now, right? Just because of the availability of food. Now, we know the famine is over in Israel, but Moab never went through the famine, okay? So it's going to, just situationally, it's better stay in Moab. Yeah, there's some food coming back, but it's going to be hard to find. As we know later on, Ruth's got to go out and glean, right? That she's just picking up some of the scraps. She's not having to do that in Moab right now. They're able to get whatever it is that they need. So simply because, just based on the availability of food, Moab is a much better place to stay for them. Whose God, though, seems to be taking better care of his people? Israel's or Moab's? Just on outward appearance, who appears to be taking better care of the people? You can say it. It's okay. It's not blasphemous. You can say it. It appears that Moab's God is taking better care. Why? Because there's food in Moab, right? There's a famine going on. So on an outward appearance, that is exactly how it appears. It appears that Moab's God seems to be doing a better job of taking care of the people. But as you read verses 14... as you read verses 15 down through verse 17, we see a different decision that was made. Verse 15, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law was gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge, and thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught be death part thee and me. There is a decisive decision that is made here by Ruth. Okay? And as we close up, and we're going to leave this part of the story right here, but let's consider Ruth's background just for a second. Let's just assume, okay, just to put it in our years, that Ruth was 18 when she got married. Okay, she may have been younger, may have been older, right? We don't see exactly, but let's just, for context, assume she was 18 when she got married. For 18 years, Ruth has lived what type of life? In Moab. A heathen life, right? Totally pagan. And the Moabites, we know, were they faithful to their wrong God? Oh, absolutely, right? The pagans would have been very faithful to their rituals. They thought that everything, was because of the gods that they served. Ruth's mother and father, we'd have to see anything about, but they would have been pagan people who would have instilled probably these pagan rituals into Ruth, especially a woman, a young girl at that age. As she's growing up, there would have been great care. If you go and look at some of the ancient civilizations, the sons were taught family things. The daughters were the ones that kind of carried a lot of the religious traditions in the households, right? That was, they were kind of the ones that kept things going because they were using the rituals and they knew all this stuff. They were using the temples and there was all sorts of things. So Ruth would have been exposed greatly to the pagan traditions and rituals and would have been probably very deeply steeped in what was going on religiously in Moab. She gets married to an Israelite who we think should have been a godly man, but there's some things that are happening that says that maybe he's not so godly because he's choosing pagan women, right, as a wife. So there are some decisions that are made there that aren't great. It's been about 10 years, give or take some, now that Ruth has been with Naomi, and Naomi obviously is pretty faithful in her relationship as well. And we don't see much about it as of now, but there has obviously been some type of impact that has happened between Ruth and Naomi, because we see specifically Ruth telling Naomi that I'm going to go back where you die, I die, where you live, I die, or I live, where you go, I go. When you serve your God, I serve him as my God. Right? And we see that specifically in verse 16. I will lodge thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So Ruth understands the difference between the way in which she has been living and the way that she was raised, and the God that she's been raised with, and the God of Naomi. Okay? And if you think about this for just a second, if you just take Ruth, right, and you just stick her in the middle, and you say, experiences with Moab's God, experiences with my mother-in-law's God, this seems a whole lot worse than this. Right? Moab's food's good. They've conquered the Israelites. She found a husband. She obviously made a great connection with her mother-in-law. Things have been okay. But then she sees Naomi serving the God of Israel. Husband's dead. Son's dead. Son's dead. No food at home. Israelites under capture. People scatter everywhere. Things don't look great. But for some reason, Ruth's love for Naomi, or Naomi's faith that she has displayed to Ruth, the way in which Naomi handled herself through 3 tragic losses, there has been something that has happened that Ruth sees this situation and goes, you know what? That's got to be better. So we see Orpah, who didn't have the same experience. She sees things are better over here. She puts the face on for a while. Yeah, no, I'm not leaving. No, I don't want to leave. We're staying with you. But when push comes to shove, she gets out of there. Ruth, on the other hand, is exhibiting some true faithfulness, first of all, just to Naomi, her mother-in-law, right? Which kind of shows the character that Ruth has anyways, and it makes sense later on in the story why she does what she does. We kind of see the evidence of that now. But there has been something that has happened between Ruth and Naomi that she sees everything Naomi has gone through, and maybe Naomi is just super faithful, and she's super faithful in her prayer life, and she's even in the midst of this tragedy, it has had an impact on Ruth. This is the lesson I have for you today. Guys, we never really know the impact that you are having on people who are around you. You never know who's watching. You never know who's staring at you. You never know who's maybe looking at your life and trying to either compare or gain some lessons. You never really know who's watching. And that means you never really know who you are impacting. That's why you got to show up every day. Right? That's why it's important to show up every day and maintain faithfulness. And like we said, go through every day to make sure you are being faithful and obedient to God, because the impact it may be having on someone else, we never really know. I bet Naomi didn't fully understand the impact she was having on Ruth. Although Ruth was there, was helping and living and doing all these things, but she probably didn't really understand the impact she had on Ruth until she got to a point. She said, you know what? I got to go back. It makes much more sense for you two to go back to your house. And Ruth grabs a hold of her, probably by the shoulders, or by the cheeks, or whatever, and says, you know what? No. Where you go, I go. Your people are now my people. And I would imagine, dramatic pause, your God is my God. And Naomi probably didn't understand the impact that she has had. Now, this is the first big decision here, or the second big decision here in the life of Naomi. And now we see Ruth kind of coming with her. What did Ruth's decision, we'll finish with this question, what does Ruth's decision reveal about her relationship to Israel's God versus her country's gods? She's devoted to who? Israel's God, right? We see now, she's devoted to God, and then in essence, by doing that, the counter to that is what? She's then denouncing her gods, right? By being dedicated to God, devoted to God, she is denouncing her own God. Now, Ruth could have been, we'll talk some more reasons next week why. She's maybe tired of the worship of Shamash or some of the other things, child sacrifice. There's some stuff going on that's not great. Maybe she just fed up with it. Maybe Naomi's had this big impact. We'll get into that more next week. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you again for another opportunity that we have to be able to look at your word this morning. We're so thankful for this story of Ruth and for the faithfulness that is displayed there by her, and then this is a series of events that will continue to happen as we look through this the next few weeks. Lord, I pray it's a reminder to us that you will take care of your people who are faithful to you. You have given the promise. We see that no more now than we will through the book of Ruth. Lord, so I pray we continue to see evidence, Lord, of the importance of remaining faithful to you. Lord, I love you and we thank you. For Pastor Rob, as he comes here the next few moments, the Lord has the message for this afternoon. Lord, you'll be attentive to it as well. In your name I pray. Amen.